Action of wind and water in arid area. Wind erosion and resultant features. Process of wind erosion. Wind plays an important role in shaping of the arid landscape. This is done through the following processes: deflation, abrasion, and attrition. Deflation. This is the erosive process through which wind removes dry and unconsolidated material. Light material are lifted up and carried for a longer distance. The power of wind to remove the material depends on the speed and weight of the materials picked up and blown away. Abrasion. It is also known as sandblast of the wind. It is the grinding, scraping, and polishing of desert's rock surfaces by materials carried by the wind. Strong winds pick up grains of sand and drives them with considerable force. Attrition. This is where materials carried by wind collide against each other and the rock surface, reducing into smaller fragments. The materials reduced are known as millet seed. Resultant features of wind erosion. Features formed by wind erosion in the desert includes mushroom rock, yadangs, hollows, zeugen, and pedestal. Mushroom blocks. These are features produced by undercutting at the base of homogeneous rock. It results due to different rates of abrasion experienced at the base and the top of the rock outcrop. Zeugen. These are ridge and furrow landscapes formed from massive rock with alternating horizontal layers of hard and soft rock. The softer layer is quickly worn out by wind abrasion and deflation, deepening and enlarging the furrows, while harder, more resistant layers stands above the furrows as zeugens. Rock pedestal or goas. These are irregular pillar of rocks formed by wind erosion through abrasion process. They form when the softer layer of the rock are worn away more rapidly than the harder layers. The base undergoes greater abrasion. Yadangs. They are formed where there are alternating vertical parallel bands of resistant rock. The bands lie parallel to the prevailing wind. Wind abrasion erodes weaker rocks more compared to the hand rock to produce ridges and furrows. The band of more resistant rock stands up as ridges above the weaker rock, which has been eroded more, forming furrows. Deflation hollows or depression. The hollows are formed when wind scoops and blows away loose and unconsolidated materials, for example, sand, by the process of deflation. A pre-existing depression is lowered and widened to form a shallow basins called a deflation hollow. Continued deflation may reach a water-bearing rock to form an oasis or a swamp. Millet seed sand grains. These are millet-sized sand particles produced by wind attrition. They are mainly found in extensive sandy deserts. Ventifacts. A ventifact is a product of wind abrasion. Ventifact is a Latin word meaning made by the wind. Ventifact are blocks of broken down rock fragments whose faces are eroded and polished by the wind. They vary in sizes from pebbles to large boulders. Transport by wind in arid areas. Wind transports its load in three ways, namely suspension, salutation, and surface creep. Suspension. This is where dust particles, sand, and light materials are picked up by the wind and carried within the wind over long distances. The dust particles can remain along over a very long time. Saltation. Saltation is the process by which sand grains in the desert move in a series of hops following a path. When the grains hit the ground, they rebound and move further forward. Gravity pulls the grains back towards the surface. Surface creep. The process in which heavy materials are rolled on the surface is called surface creep. These materials are unconsolidated and they include gravel and pebbles that are not airborne. Factors that influence wind transportation in the desert. The factors that influence wind transportation are wind speed and force or strength, nature of material being transported, presence of obstacles, vegetation cover, and weather changes.
Wind speed or strength. A strong wind transports more and heavier load than weak winds. Nature of materials. Light materials such as fine dust are easily picked up by the wind and blown to far distances, whereas the heavier particles are usually swept along the ground surface as surface creep. Presence of obstacles. Obstacles such as large rocks or landforms will block the wind, hence reducing its speed. This forces the wind to drop some of its load. Vegetation or water masses. Vegetation and water masses have the soil particles bound together. This reduces the ability of the wind to pick and transport the soil particles. The speed and strength of the wind are reduced, which lowers the rate of transportation. Weather changes. Periodic weather changes leads to a change in the rate of transportation by wind. For
wind deposition in arid areas. Wind starts depositing its load when its velocity decreases. Materials carried by wind in the desert is deposited to form variety of features. Depositional features are grouped into dunes, dross, and loess.
Dunes. Sand is deposited by wind in molds of different sizes and shapes known as dunes. The size depends on the supply of sand to form low ridges known as dunes. Types of dunes. There are many dunes depending on their shapes and formation. These are bachans, safe dunes, transverse dunes, parabolic dunes, and star dunes.
Bachans. These are crescent-shaped heaps of sand of which the horns are parallel to the prevailing wind. Its two edges are pushed forward by wind to give its crescent shape. The leeward side is steep because of the eddies set up by the wind. The windward side is gentle. Bachans move slowly forward into the direction of the prevailing wind. Safe or longitudinal dunes. These are ridges of sand. Crosswinds interrupt prevailing winds to drive sand from side to sides, hence breaking the crescent-shaped chain of bachans into longitudinal ridges. Transverse or lateral dunes. These are long wave-like sand dune ridges which are separated from each other by low troughs. Parabolic dunes. These form where vegetation partially covers the sand. The shape of these dunes resembles the shape of bachans, except that their tips point into the wind rather than downwind. Star dunes. These are isolated hills of sand that exhibit a complex star shape. They develop where wind blows from all directions. Dross. These are the largest sand features and often reach up to heights of about 200 meters. They are similar in shape to safe and transverse dunes. Loess. The term Loess is derived from the name on a village in Germany where farmers used oil to make bricks. These are yellowish fine-grained porous dust-like soil which was deposited by wind farther away from the places of origin. Loess can accumulate to form fertile soil of great thickness. For example, in northwest China, the fine-textured, deep well-drained soil is used for farming. Water erosion in arid areas. Water erosion is responsible for the formation of a number of landforms in the desert. The water originates from flash floods and exotic rivers. These features are wadis, alluvial fans, bajadas or bahada, layers or sebka, mesas and buttes, inselbugs, pediment and pediplain. Wadis. These are steep, dry hollows in arid areas. They are formed when flash floods occur on a steep, undulating landscape. The flash flood cut rills or channel which develops into gullies which produce steep-sided valleys called wadis. Alluvial fans. These are low convex-shaped deposits of sand and gravel, the apex of which points upstream suddenly leaves a narrow course or a main valley depositing its load. Bajadas or bahada. If several adjacent alluvial cones merge, they form a continuous undulating features of coarse sand, angular screes, and ground deposits at the foot of the steep slopes of a mountain range.
Playas or sebka. This is a basin of inland drainage containing a shallow fluctuating lake, usually saline, surrounded by sheets of saline and alkaline crust or mud. Playas are formed from the coalescence of many alluvial fans. Mesas and buttes. Mesas are extensive flat-topped residual tablelands which are generally capped with resistant rock stratum, that is, layer in arid areas. Buttes are small but prominent residual flat-topped hills, usually capped with resistant rock stratum which remain after denudation of a plateau in arid and semi-arid areas.
Inselbergs. An inselberg is a steep, isolated, round-topped mass of rock standing in an extensive flat area. In the deserts, they may have resulted from both wind erosion and sheet wash, which removed the weathered materials, leaving a mass of resistant rock standing on its own. Pediment. A pediment is a gently sloping rock platform which either consists of bare rock or just have a thin covering of gravel. It is formed when the uplands are worn back by weathering and erosion in a process known as scarp retreat. Pediplain. These are extensive, low and gently sloping lands and desert areas. They form when pediments surround an original highland. The slopes at the edges of the highland continue to retreat all around, forming extensive pediments. With time, the highland is reduced to a residual hill which looks like an inselberg. This is eventually eroded, forming a continuous plain with many concave surfaces. This is called a pediplain.